Hello everyone, and welcome to a project video where we build a full stack MERN application, our memories project. In previous videos, you'll learn how to build a full stack MERN project. In this video, we're going to add authentication. Auth is a complex process. It means allowing users to log in and register. Today, you're going to learn it completely. Email login using JSON Web Token, OAuth, Google login, and much more. If you haven't watched the first two parts, they're going to be linked in the description. Make sure to watch them first and then come back. This video is special because it can be watched as a standalone video that teaches you authentication. So, if you feel that you already know the basics and you want to learn the authentication only, you are in the right place. However, I'd still strongly encourage you to watch the first two parts, because then you'll have a much stronger understanding of the project we're building. As I mentioned before, I initially planned on putting this as a paid course, but I later decided to release it completely free for you guys here on YouTube. So, to support this video, leave a like, comment, and subscribe. It shouldn't take more than a few seconds, and I really appreciate it. On another note, some of you in the comments requested me to add some extra features to this app, things like pagination or even a live chat feature. If you'd like me to create a fourth part to this series where I add one of the features you requested, make sure to like and comment what would you like to see next. If this video reaches 5,000 likes, we are recording part 4. With that said, let's jump into the demo of what you're going to learn how to build today. We can start by logging out because that's the only thing we had before. Before, we only had the memories and that was it. Now, as you can see, we added this sign in button on top right, and also we masked the form so right now it's not visible if you're not logged in. Also, as you can notice, you cannot like something if you're not logged in. So let's click sign in and see what do we have in here. You have a complete form to sign in, email and password in here. You can sign in with that, or if you don't have an account, you can go ahead here and create an account. You need to type in your first and last name, email, and password, and that's it. You're simply going to be signed up, and then you can log in with that account. Now, just to be quick, let me show you something simpler. Just click here, Google Sign In. We are also going to implement that. With one click, you'll be able to log in with your Google account. And take a look at that. You're in there. It automatically found out my name, also my image right here, and there we go. With that, you can like other people's posts, and notice this, you can also delete your own post, and then you also can create new posts yourself. One more really cool feature is that we implemented only one like per person. Considering that we now have the accounts, it's easy to simply keep an account who likes things. Before, you were able to like indefinitely, but now you can only leave one like per post. As you can see, we've added quite a few complex features, such as login and registration using JSON Web Token, so that's also something we're going to learn today. Also, OAuth using Google, and finally, we are also using local storage. So, if you come back to this website or refresh, this is going to be saved in the local storage, so once you come back, you're still logged in if the token hasn't expired. Quite a lot of interesting stuff coming up, so let's dive right in. Before we start with coding, I would just like us to be on the same page on where we are with the project. Down below, I'm going to put the link to this project MERN Memories GitHub repository. In here, you have everything that you need. If you get stuck, you can find the correct code right here. Also, I've created two different branches, part 1 and 2 and separate part 3. We're going to start with part 1 and 2 today. That's going to be everything that we've done so far. And then the part 3 contains the full authentication code. So if you're just tuning in and if you haven't watched the part 1 and 2, you can click here, part 1 and 2, and simply fork the repository. As you can see on the top right, you need to fork it. Forking a repository simply means that it's going to show on your own profile and then you can clone it and use it. And if you guys followed part 1 and 2, in that case you'll most likely have your own repository, but if you don't already, definitely make sure to clone it. And again, I hardly advise you to watch them because there are going to be a lot of parts that are going to be referenced from the part 1 and 2. Right now, I also want to show you an amazing tool that we'll be using today. It's called Zeet. The link is going to be down in the description. Zeet is going to allow us to deploy our database, our MongoDB database, our front-end part with React, and also our back-end part. So far, to deploy these things, you needed like 3 or 4 different tools. MongoDB Atlas for the database, then you needed something like Netlify for the front-end part, and finally you needed something like Heroku for the back-end. And all of these tools can be unreliable and they don't work well together. So it can happen that one of the services doesn't communicate with the other. With Zeet, you do everything in one application. It's all together. So make sure to click this login button on top right, and you simply log in with your GitHub account. You can simply do that right now because we'll definitely be using this later. And for people who haven't been watching the first 2 parts, is that you need to head to cloud.mongodb.com, and then in there you need to create your cluster. Now for the cluster setup, you can go into database access and create a new database user and give him all permissions. Finally, in the network access, you can click add IP address and click add current IP address. With that, if you go back to clusters, you can go to connect your application, and now you have this connection URL that you can copy. Make sure to exchange the username and password right here. Amazing. Again, if you're having trouble with this, I think this is mentioned in the first part of the video, somewhere at the start, so definitely make sure to watch through that. Now we are ready to dive with coding. So what I'm going to do to make sure we're on the same page is I'm going to simply clone the part 1 and 2 branch of the project Mirror Memories, and that's where we're going to start from. To do that, make sure to open a new Visual Studio Code window, head under View, and finally Terminal. Inside of here, you can simply say git clone and paste that link. Make sure that you have git downloaded and installed. You can simply Google something like git download, and that is going to be it. Once you clone it, you can cd into project Mirror Memories, and you need to open this inside of your Visual Studio Code. You can simply type code dot, and this is going to open it in a new Visual Studio Code window. This command is not going to always work, so if it doesn't work for you, make sure to find this folder inside of your File Explorer and simply drag and drop it into your Visual Studio Code window. That way, you'll have this opened and we'll be on the same page. Now we can prepare our terminals. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to split our terminal into half, and I'm going to clear both. Our left side terminal is going to be for our client side, or the React. So we can say cd client. Now we are in there. And what you can do there is we can first install something. So I'm going to say npm install, and there we're going to install jwt decode, and also we need to install react-google-login. So these are the only 2 dependencies we'll be using in part 3. Once you click that, that's going to install all the necessary dependencies. And also on the backend side, we need to cd into server, so cd server. And now in there, we can also write npm install, and we can install bcrypt.js and also JSON web token. Great, that's going to install all the necessary dependencies. Great, that seems to be it. So now if we go to our server, you can see here, we have those things installed. And if we go right here, you should be able to see that we have these 2 dependencies added. Just to make sure all of these are installed and up to date, I'm just going to run npm install without any dependencies one more time, just to make sure that we have absolutely everything that we need. Okay, there we go. That is it. So now if you clear both sides and you simply type npm start, it's going to start both sides, and we should be able to see our application up and running, and then we'll be ready to start with coding. And there we go. Our application started. If memories didn't show up for you, try creating some, or go to server and make sure that this connection URL string is written correctly. So you have to have your username here, password here, and then finally you need to have the name of the database at the end. This can really be anything. With that said, we can close our terminals, we can reopen them when we need them, and now we can start implementing auth. We can start on the front-end side. We can first start adding on the navigation bar the items for the login and registration. So once we click that, we'll be redirected to a different form, the form for login or register. So let's do that first. If we go back to our code, you can head to client, we can go to src, components, and then right inside of here, we can create that navbar. If I remember correctly, we also had a bit of a navbar before, but we didn't have it as a separate component. So if we go to app.js, you can see that our navbar is here. So we're going to divide that into a new component. So inside of components, we can create a new component. It's going to be called navbar. And now we can create a file called navbar.js and also styles.js. We're going to copy what we have so far in our app. So right here. And I'm going to create a RAFCE, a React function component with exports. And we're simply going to paste what we have so far. Okay, that's great. As you can see, I'm using ESLint, so some of the things are gonna get changed immediately, but don't worry about that. And finally, we have to import some classes. So in here, we also need our app bar and typography. So I'm going to go here and say import. What do we need? The app bar and typography from @materialui/core. And then finally, we also need our classes. So to do that, I'm going to switch this back to the normal return function right there. And what we need to say is const classes is equal to use styles. Of course, right now we don't have the styles, but we have to import them. So again, as we always do, I'm going to give you all those styles right away right here. You can simply copy and paste them. They're going to be down in the description for absolutely all of the components. Now at the top of the file, we can say import use styles from, and that's going to be just /styles. A lot of you guys mentioned that you like these applications and that you like building everything out. And even though you prefer that I simply copy and paste the styles for simplicity and time-saving purposes, you'd want to learn a bit more about Material UI and how to style things with it. So, what do you say? Do you guys want me to make a separate Material UI video where I'm going to teach you how to do everything in Material UI and also how to do the styles? Let me know in the comments down below. Okay, with that said, looks like we are missing one thing from our navbar, and that is the link to the memories image. So if we go back to the app, you can see that we simply need to import it. I'm going to copy it from here. Also, I'm going to remove these things right there because we don't need them anymore. And now in here, we have to import that path. Now the path is going to be just a bit different. It is going to be .. and then .. images, memories, PNG. Okay. With this, we haven't done anything special. We just removed our navbar. So to bring it back, we have to go to the app.js. And then in here, we need to import that navbar. If you simply start typing in Visual Studio Code, it's going to immediately import that for you. So that's really handy. I'm going to put it right there. And that is going to be a self-closing component. If it didn't import it for you, just make sure to say import navbar /components and then navbar. Okay, with that said, if we go back, you can see that we have everything we had so far. So why did we even put it in a new component in the first place? Well, now we're going to make it more complicated. So we didn't want to clutter the app. We want to have everything in its special components. Okay, so what else do we need in this navbar? Well, we're going to change it a bit. So inside of here, I'm going to create a new div. That div is going to have a class name of classes.brandContainer. And we're going to put all of these things inside of it. So now we have a div and we have a typography and image right there. This typography is going to be of a component which is equal to link because it's going to be pointing to our home. So we can say to, and we can just say / because it's going to be our main root. And of course we have to import link from React router DOM. Also, I'm not sure if we installed the React router DOM. Looks like I missed that. So what we have to do is open our terminal one more time. We have to close this from running by pressing Ctrl+C and then Y. And you can simply say npm install React router DOM. Yep, we also need that because now we're going to have a complete app where we're going to route things. So you can wait until that installs and we will simply restart the application by running npm start. Great, now we have the React router installed as well, and that's not going to be a problem. Okay, that's going to be it for our typography, and that's also going to be it for our image. So moving below, just below our div, we can create a new component which is going to be called toolbar. That toolbar is going to have a class name of classes.toolbar. And down below, we're going to show some logic depending on if we have the user logged in or if we don't. So right now, I'm going to create just a mock user. So we can say const user is equal to null. Later, this can be filled with an object, with a real user, or maybe the user is not logged in. So what we can do is we can do something like this. If user exists, right? If user exists, then we're going to show something right here. And then we can use another ternary to say else, show something else right here. So we'll be showing something if a user is logged in and something different if a user is not logged in. If the user is logged in, we want to show his information. So in here, I'm going to create a div with a class name of classes.profile. In here, we're going to have an avatar. Avatar is simply going to be a small circular image displaying how our user looks like, or it's simply going to show a letter of their first name. So we can say avatar class name is equal to classes.avatar, or it's going to be classes.purple. Yep. And then we have an alt tag. Alt is going to be equal to user.result.name. And then it's also going to have an src. So src can be equal to user.result.image URL. So later on, when we actually get this user, we want to display all of these informations. Finally, if he doesn't have an image, we want to show the first letter of his name, and that is going to be user, but we need to open a block of logic here. User.result.name.car@, and simply call it and say 0. So we want to get the first character. That is it for the avatar. Now below, we want to have a typography. So we're going to say typography. The class name is going to be equal to classes.username, and variant is going to be equal to age6. Inside of there, we can simply open a new block of code and say user.result.name. The last thing that we need to have is the button to log out. So I'm going to create a new button. The variant is going to be contained like this. And a class name is going to be equal to classes.logout. We are also going to have a color, and that color is going to be secondary. We need to have an onClick property, but we're going to leave that empty for now. And finally, we have to write what the button is going to say, and that is going to be simply logout. Great, so this is the block of code we see if we are logged in. If we are not, we simply want to show the button to log in. So let's create that button. That is going to be button. It's going to be a component which is equal to link, and it's going to have a to property to/auth. So this one is actually going to redirect us to a different page where we're going to show the authentication. It is going to have a variant of contained and a color of primary. What the button is going to say is simply going to be sign in. So in here, we can say sign in. Okay, and now you can see we don't have a few components imported. So that's going to be a toolbar and a button. So right here, we can import the toolbar and the button. Great, so now if we save that, let's see how does that look like. Okay, we first got an error because we are using a link outside a router. That means that we have to actually use our React Router DOM to make our app multi-page. We make our React apps multi-page using React Router DOM. So we can do that if you go back to the application. And now inside of here, we can import some of the things from React Router DOM. These things are going to be browser, router, switch, and also route from React Router DOM. Great. Now inside of here, I would first like to move this thing into a new component because we'll be adding a lot of things to it. We want to keep our app clean. So I'm going to copy all of this with the grow and we want to create a new component. So I'm going to create a new folder called home, create a new file called home.js. Now that we have the home.js component, in there we can also create an refce and simply paste everything that includes this grow right here. Of course, we'll have to import some components, so I'm going to copy the imports from the app.js and paste it right here. Container, grow, and then grid. You can also see that we are missing the posts and the form, so let's import that. Import posts from dot slash, it's going to be dot slash posts / posts, like this. And then we also need the form, so that's going to be import form from dot slash form / form. Okay, now we have the form as well, and you can see that we're missing the current ID and the set current ID. So how do we get that? Well, if you think about it, we can declare it right here and not have it in the app, because the app shouldn't be doing any major logic, especially not with the posts. Posts are only contained in the home. So we can actually use this entire logic and move it all the way to our home. First, let's delete this thing that we copied. So inside of here, we no longer have this. What we have now is going to be a self-closing component, which is simply going to say home. Okay, with that said, we can copy this entire part and we can paste it in the home component. My ESLint again turned this into an instant return, but I'm going to bring it back and create a normal return just so I can put these things here. So let me just space that out. And as you can see, now we have the current ID and the set current ID right there. We have to import the use state, use effect, get posts, and the use dispatch though. So we can head to the app and we can mostly get all of the imports from here. You can see import use dispatch from React Redux. So let's copy that. Then we need get posts. We also need to import that. So that's going to be around here. But the path is going to be different. It's going to be dot slash and then one more time dot slash. Okay, and the final thing is to import use state and use effect from React. With that, our component is filled. And now in the app, we can get rid of this extra logic. There we go. Take a look at how many things we don't need right now to clutter our app. We have everything in the home. So let me remove these things. We don't need that. No need for any components right now. And the only thing that we have is the navbar and the home. And as you can see, we have that. And I think I removed the import from React router DOM, which we are going to need. Yep, that is right here. So I'm going to bring this back. And now we can implement our React router. So how can you do that? Well, you have to wrap everything in the browser router. So I'm going to do that right now. Browser router, and then we have our container right there. Then we're going to have a switch statement right here. So you can say switch, and I see that I didn't name it properly, so I'm going to rename it to switch right there. And then inside of the switch, you need to have a few routes. So I'm going to create our first route. That route is going to be self-closing tag, and we're going to simply say path is equal to slash. So this is our home route. It needs to be exact, and the component is going to be equal to home component. We have to import it right there. Then below that, we're going to add one new route. This one is going to have a path of auth, and the component is going to be called auth. This component is not defined yet, so we have to create it. Let's do that right now. Inside of our components, I'm going to create a new component, or rather a new folder called auth. Inside of that auth, I'm going to create a new file called auth.js, and also we're going to create styles.js. For the auth file, again, I'm simply going to say refce. And by the way, if you don't have that, that is going to be a package. Let me take a look. It's going to be ES7 React Redux GraphQL snippets. So you can download that. That's going to autofill the refce for you. Okay, and then in here, for now, I'm simply going to say auth. That is going to be it. Okay, and I'm using ESLint, and I don't want this to be changed to an instant return because later on we will need something. I'm just going to say const state is equal to null here. Okay, that way everything is going to be centered like this. Okay, with that, we now have to import this component. And again, if you simply type it and click right there, it's going to be imported right for you. Okay, so with that, our routing should be done. As you can see, we have our navbar. It's not inside of the switch, so that means it's going to be showing up always. And then we have our switch, which means switch between these two components. Either show the home or show the auth. And of course, we have to remove this home from the bottom because we are showing it right here. Okay, now can we actually see this in the browser? Let's test it out. And there we go. Everything is as it used to be, but we made a few different components. We created the one for the navbar, and we created a home component with the form and all the posts. Now let's try clicking the sign in and see what happens. And there we go. We are routed to a completely different component that now says auth. This is the place where we're going to implement the login and registration form. That seems like a valid next step. So let's do that next. Okay, let's start creating the layout for our auth form. Inside of the auth.js, we're going to first import a few things. And these are going to be, again, avatar, button, paper, grid. Then we're going to need a typography, and finally, a container. All of these are going to be imported from @material_UI/core. While we're here, we can also import the styles, meaning use styles, from /styles. And of course, we have to create those. So again, linked in the description are going to be the styles for this specific file. I don't want you to spend time on writing CSS. I want you to focus on the important things, which is in this case, authentication. Okay, with that said, we can say const classes is equal to use styles and call it as a function. Now we can start creating the layout for our auth form. And it's going to look like this. First of all, we're going to wrap everything inside of a container. That container is going to have a component property, which is going to be equal to a string of main. It's also going to have a max width property, which is going to be equal to XS. Down below, we're going to wrap everything with a paper. So we can say paper, and that paper is going to have a class name of classes.paper and also an elevation of 3. This is simply going to make a white style div that looks like a paper, and there we can have all the inputs inside of that. Now, first thing inside of that is we're going to have an avatar, and that avatar is going to have a class name of classes.avatar. Finally, inside of there, we're going to have a lock icon. So right inside of here, you can create something like this, lock outlined icon. And that is going to be a self-closing tag that we have to import. So at the top, let's import that icon. It's simply going to say import lock outlined icon from, and in this case, it's not going to be @material_UI core. It's going to be @material_UI/icons and then /lock outlined. There we go. Now that we have that, we can continue with our form. Below the avatar, we're going to have one typography. This typography is going to be of a variant, which is going to be H5. And it simply needs to say either sign up or sign in, depending on what we want to do. So right now, I'm going to create, once again, a mock variable for now, which is going to be called isSignUp. And we're going to leave that to false right now. Based on this variable, we're going to change a lot of different things in the form. So right now, we can open a new logic block, and we can say if isSignUp, then we want to show something like a string of sign up. Otherwise, we want to show sign in. Now below that, we're finally starting with our form. Our form is going to have a class name of classes.form, and it's also going to have an onSubmit. Right now, we don't have an onSubmit, but we could as well create it. So I'm going to say onSubmit. The function we're going to call is going to be called handleSubmit. So just right here, you can create a const handleSubmit function. There we go. For now, we're going to leave it blank. Now, inside of our form, we're going to have a grid. That grid is going to be of a type container, and it's going to have a spacing equal to 2. Inside of here, we can show all of our inputs. So let's first start with the first name and the last name. Remember, we only have the first name and the last name if we are signing up. If you're already signed in, we don't need that. So we can open a new blog and we can say if is sign up. Then we could use the ternary, but we can also use the end operator. So we can say is sign up. Only if it is sign up, then show something. And in this case, we're going to show an empty React fragment. And then inside of there, we're going to show two different inputs. So these are going to be text field elements. We can say text field like that. And we're going to have a few different things there. We need to have a name. So name is going to be equal to first name. Then we also need a label, which is going to be equal to first name. We need a handle change method. So I'm going to say handle change here. We can go ahead and create that handle change right now. Handle change is going to simply be equal to handle change. So let's create an arrow function here. Const handle change is going to be equal to an arrow function. Okay, what else do we need on our input? We need also the auto focus, because this is going to be the first element we want to focus on. And then we can say xs is equal to 6. And we'll need a lot more things. I'm going to explain why this is going to be different in just a second. So this is going to be a self-closing tag. There we go. Now, of course, we're going to have one more for the last name. We have to change all of these things. Then we're going to have multiple more text fields for passwords, for confirming passwords, for email. And all of these are going to be kind of different, but in most cases, they are going to stay the same. So we don't want to have the inputs that have like 10 different props. What you want to do when you have most of the same components, most of the components that look and behave the same, is you want to create a new custom component which is going to generalize the logic. That way, you don't have to write everything for each one of them. You can simply create a one that has all the things and then only specify the things that change. It might be complicated, but let me show you what I mean. This is a really good practice in React. So inside of here, inside of our auth, I'm going to create a new file called input.js. That input is going to be an refce, a simple component, and we're going to import a few things from Material UI. These things are going to be text field. We're going to import a grid. We're going to import an input adornment. And we're also going to import the icon button from React Material UI, and that's going to be core. Okay, great. And I also forgot, like in here, we don't only need a text field. We need to wrap each text field with a grid. So it would look something like this. And then each grid would have a property of xs is equal to 6, and then md is equal to 12, or something like that. So you can see here, we have this grid once, but then again, you need to have it for each new text field. And you can see it kind of adds a lot of code. It makes it unclean. A lot of repetitive code, at least, you can see. So now we want to change that. We want to make a generalized input field. So to do that, we can create one grid right there, and all of our inputs are going to have that grid. That's going to save us the trouble of writing this multiple times. This grid is going to be of type item. It is going to have the property of xs equal to 12, but what if we want some inputs to take only half the width? Then we can do something like sm is equal to 6, but now all of them are going to take half the width. So we have to have a special prop. We can name it something like half. And then if half is true, we want this to be 6, otherwise we want this to be 12. So see how we can make it dynamic. Okay, now inside of there, we want to have a text field. Text field belongs to Material UI, and it is going to be a self-closing tag. I'm going to expand it on multiple rows so we can add our props inside of there. Each text field needs to have a name, so I'm going to say name is equal to name right there, because name needs to be dynamic. As you can see right now, we don't have a name, so all of these things we have to import as props. So inside of here, I'm going to add a name. Then each text field needs to have an onChange property, so I'm going to say onChange is equal to handle change. Then we have a variant that is equal to outline. This is the same for absolutely all text fields, so we don't have to change that. Another thing that is the same for all text fields is going to be required. We don't have to send that as a prop. That is always going to stay the same. All of them are going to have the property of full width. Then for the label, we have to change that. So I'm going to say label is equal to label, and we're going to pass that as a prop. Finally, autofocus is going to be equal to autofocus, and type is going to be equal to type. And one final thing that's going to be happening only on one input is going to be called input props, like this, with a capital I, capital props. That is simply an icon that we're showing on the right side of the input if we want to click it. And that's going to be for show password. You know that field when you have a password and you're not sure what you typed in? You want to click that and then it's going to show it to you. So we can open a new block and then we can say if name is equal to password, like this. Then we want to show a block of code. So you can open this and say end adornment is equal to, and in here you can use the input adornment. That's going to be a component. The position is going to be set to end. So position set to end. And all that we need is going to be an icon button. That icon button is going to have an on-click property, which is going to be equal to handle show password. And in there, we're going to show if type is equal to password. So if type triple equal to password, then we're going to show an icon that says visibility. Okay, a self-closing tag. Otherwise, we're going to have an icon that says visibility off. And it's also going to be a self-closing tag. Now this is going to be the end adornment, but if we don't have that, we can simply say null, don't show anything. And if you know React or JavaScript, you know that when we have a ternary operator with the second value being null, what you can do is simply change this to end, and then you don't have to provide that null right there. Great, so if you save that, you'll see that we're missing quite a few things that we need to import here. And this is actually good, because this means that we are taking all of the things that we need in here for this special input, and we are importing them right here, and not in our auth. Because in that way, we're cluttering our auth component, which by itself is already be complicated. So let's import those icons right there. Import visibility from add material UI icons / visibility. I'm going to copy that line, and the second line is simply going to say visibility off. Great. Now all of the other things that we need, like handle change, label, autofocus, we're importing from here. So let's do that. Name, handle change, we need a label, we need a half, then we need the autofocus, the type, and finally the handle show password. With that, our custom input is done. You can see we are exporting it as the input. Finally, we can import it right here. Import input from /input. Great. Now, instead of typing all of this, we can remove the grids completely. We can remove that, this as well, and we're going to rename this to input instead of a text field. And now, as you can see, we are passing only the props that we need. Name is equal to first name, label is equal to first name, we're passing the handle change method, and everything else that we need. In this case, I think we simply specify the property half, so we don't need to say the xs is equal to 6. We can simply say half, and that is going to make it 6. And for the second one, we don't need the autofocus as well, because we have that, and we can say half. As you can see, this makes our inputs a lot slimmer. We don't need to have something like, let me take a look, something like variant outline for each one, required for each one, full width for each one, and all of these things. We simply specify what we need. And now we can continue with all the inputs that we have both in the login and the register form. So let's create them. We have a new input. This one is going to have the name of email, a label of email address, and a handle change, which is going to be equal to handle change. Finally, in this case, we need to have a type, and the type is going to be equal to email. Below that one, we're going to create one new input, also a self-closing tag. This one is going to have a name is equal to password. It's also going to have a label, which is going to be equal to password. And it's going to have, you guessed it, a handle change equal to a handle change. The type is going to be, of course, password. But what if we want to click that button, which means show password? In that case, we have to change this from password to simply text. That means that we need to have some kind of variable that's going to manage our show password. And that is going to be a state. So we can do that right now. We can import React as well as the use state hook at the top. And now we can create that show password field. So right here, I'm going to say const, make a new state, and we're going to say show password and set show password. So this is going to be our state. And that's going to be equal to use state. And at the start, it is going to be set to false. Okay, so now based on this state, we can say if, right here, I'm going to delete this. If show password is true, then show text. Otherwise, show password. Okay, and finally, the final prop that we have to pass is handle show password is going to be equal to handle show password. And what is that? Well, that is going to be one function that is going to handle the show password, obviously. And the handle show password is going to be an arrow function, handle show password, that is simply going to toggle the state of the password. So we can say like this, set show password. And then in here, we need a prev state, so previous state. Whenever you're changing the state using the old state, you have to create a callback function. And then you have to get the prev show password. And then what we want to do in here is simply say, if the previous show password is something, we want to say false and then previous show password. That means that we're toggling it. So if it's on, turn it off. If it's off, turn it on. And we're passing that over as a prop, handle show password. Okay, there we go. Now our input for the password is done. Below that, we want to have one for the confirmation. And again, the password confirm field is going to show only if you're on the sign up form, not on the sign in. So I'm going to say if is sign up, then and end, then we show this input field. This input is going to have a name of confirm password. It's going to have a label of something like repeat password. And it's going to have a handle change, again, be equal to handle change. Finally, the type of this one is going to be password. Okay, we have all of the input fields that we need right now. Finally, we need a submit button. So right below the grid, I'm going to create a button. And that button is going to be of a type is equal to submit. So we're going to submit the form on this button. It's going to have a full width property, also a variant of contained, and a color of primary, as well as the class name of classes.submit. And now inside of that button, we want to say either sign in or sign up. So we can again use that property is sign up. If it is sign up, we're going to show sign up. Otherwise, we're going to show sign in. Great. So now it would make sense to take a look. What do we have? Let's go back to the browser and see if we have the auth right here. And there we go. Take a look at that. We have our sign in form. But right now, there's no way for us to switch between the sign in and the sign up. So how can we do that? Well, right now, we can just change this dummy variable to true, and that should show us our sign up. Now we have the sign up with the first name, last name, email, and password, repeat passwords as well, and the button says sign up. This is extremely good because what beginners in React would do is they would create two different components for the sign up and the sign in. They would copy all of this code right here and create two different components. What we did is we just created one variable called isSignup, and then based on the change of that variable, we changed it from signup, the title, we added or deleted some fields, and we also changed the title of the button. You can see, in React, you have to think reactively. One last thing that we could do is we could make a button that's going to allow us to switch from the sign up and the sign in. So let's do that right now. Below our button, still inside of the form, we're going to have another grid. This grid is going to be of a type container, and it's going to have a justify property, which is going to say a string of flex end. Inside of there, I'm going to create a grid. This grid is going to be of a type item. And then inside of that grid, we're going to have a button, and that button is going to have an onClick property, and onClick, we're going to call the function called switch mode. So that switch mode, again, is just a function which we're going to declare right there, const switch mode. It's going to be an arrow function, and then in here, we're going to switch the mode from the sign up to sign in. Now, what is our button going to say? Again, it's going to be different if we're logged in or not. So I'm going to again open this, say is sign up. If we are on the sign up, we're going to say already have an account, question mark, sign in. Otherwise, we're going to say something like don't have an account, question mark, sign up. Okay, let's save that and see how does it look like. There we go. You can see that we have this button right there, but right now it's not doing anything. So what do we have to do to actually make this is sign up switchable? Think about this for a second, try implementing this yourself, and then once you figured it out or once you're stuck, come back to this video and I'm going to show you how to do it. What we have to do to make this work in React fashion is make a new state field. I'm going to take this isSignup variable and I'm going to turn it into a state field. So I'm going to say const isSignup and set isSignup. That is going to be equal to use state, and at the start that can be false. Now we can remove this, everything is still gonna function, but now we have access to this set isSignup. And now we can use that inside of our switch mode function. So right inside of here, we can say set isSignup, and what we simply need to do is do the same thing that we did right here for the password. Since we are using the previous state to manage a new one, we have to get a callback function and say prev isSignup, and then in here simply say not prev isSignup. That's going to switch it on and off like a switch. Also, I want to reset the show password if we switch the mode. So I'm gonna say right here, handle show password, and I'm gonna pass the value of false. Let's save it and see if it works. We are on the sign in. I click it, we are on the sign up. There we go. This works as expected. Now we have a great looking form. As you can see, we can go back. In here, we have all of the posts. We can head to the sign in, and there we go. In here, we have the sign in and the sign up form, which both look amazing. Now the login and register using these fields, the first name, last name, email, and all of that is gonna take a bit longer. So what I would want to do first is implement the Google login button. That way we can first handle the authentication with Google and then we'll be able to do everything else. That's better because if we first implement Google, that way we'll still have everything functioning as normal, and then later on we'll be able to add everything else including these fields. Let's add the Google sign-in button right here above our current one. To do that, we'll have to import one thing, and that thing is called Google Login. So right below our Material UI imports, in here we can say import Google Login from, and that is going to be React Google Login. We installed that package at the start of this video. Okay, and now we have to use that Google Login. How do we use it? Well, it's going to be a simple button. So right here, above our current one, I'm going to call that Google Login as a component. And it is going to be a self-closing component. And here's a hint for you. Whenever you're importing something and that something starts with a capital letter, most likely it's going to be a component. Inside of here, you have to have your own client Google ID. So this is something that we're going to add as soon as we're done with creating the layout for this. So I'm going to say Google ID. We have to put that right there. Then below we have render. Render means how are we going to show our button? What is it going to look like? So in here, you get something known as render props, and this is a callback function. So inside of here, you can create a callback function. It's not going to have curly braces. It's going to be just an instant return. And then inside of there, we're going to put a normal Material UI button. That button is going to have a class name of classes.Google button. It's going to have a color of primary. Also, it's going to be a full width button, and it's going to have an on-click listener. On click, we're going to call render props dot on click. It's also going to have a disabled property, and there we're going to put the render props dot disabled, and it's also going to have a start icon. That start icon we're going to import, but it's going to be simply icon, a self-closing component that's simply going to say icon. We're going to have one more thing, and that one thing is going to be a variant of contained. Variant is equal to contained. I see that we have quite a lot of things. Some people prefer to have them like this. This way it's more easily noticeable what we have, and I agree. We can leave it like that for now until we actually finish the button. So we have the button, and finally, what can we say in there? We can say Google sign in. Now you can see that we're missing the icon property, so we have to import that. The icon is going to be a simple SVG, so we're going to create a new file right there called icon.js. And now in here, we can paste that icon. So this is going to be an SVG React component, and we can simply import it inside of our auth. You can again copy and paste this icon. It's going to be linked in the description. Now inside of our auth, we simply have to import that icon. We can do that easily by saying import icon from /icon. As you can see, now we have everything that we need in our button. So what I prefer to do is to have it in one row, because this way it doesn't clutter our view. We know that it's a button, it has a bunch of props, and it says Google sign in. Okay, great. Now we can continue with adding different props to our Google login, and these props are going to be on success and also on failure. So we have two handlers here, the handler for success action and for the failure action. On success, we're going to call Google success function, and on failure, we're going to call Google failure function. We're going to create both of these functions. Finally, the last thing that we need is going to be cookie policy, and that is going to be equal to single_host_origin. Okay, now we can create those two functions just above. Inside of here, I'm going to create the arrow function for both of these. So I'm going to select them both and say const Google success and Google failure is equal to an arrow function, and it's going to be a block of code. So what do we do on Google success and on Google failure? Well, on Google failure, I simply want to console log an error. So in here, I'm going to say console log Google, and that's going to be a string, Google sign in was unsuccessful. Okay, and we can say something like try again later. Okay, so this is going to be our Google failure. And then what do we want to do on success? Well, in here, we get access to a full response. So I'm going to say res here. And for now, I simply want to console.log.res. Of course, this is not going to work out of the box because we still haven't supplied the Google login with our client ID. So we have to find that. To get your own client ID, you have to head to console.developers.google.com. I'm going to put this link down in the description. Inside of here, on the left side, you'll have a sidebar that says credentials and then OAuth consent screen. First, we're going to go to OAuth consent screen. I already have mine created. You'll have to create a new OAuth consent screen. you can name it something like Memories app or something similar. And then in here, we'll have to do a bit of a setup. You can create our app name, you can put your user support email, and then finally, you can add your developer contact information and click Save and Continue. With that, you created your OAuth consent screen. In this case, under Scopes, I currently have nothing under test users, and this is the summary. That's it. And finally, we can go back to the dashboard. Now that you have the OAuth consent screen, you can head under Credentials. Inside of the credentials, you can click Create New Credentials, and then you can choose OAuth Client ID. Inside of here, you can choose the application type, and in our case, that's going to be a web application. I'm going to call it Memories app. Inside of here, you can put the localhost 3000 as the URI, and we can also do that for the authorized redirect URIs. So inside of here, we can do something like HTTP, localhost, and let's do 3000. I think that we can also add the /auth to this one. With that said, we can create it, and I think that should be enough. Localhost 3000 and localhost 3000 /auth for that. And there you go. You get your OAuth client ID and the client secret. Don't forget this site yet. We'll have to come back to here once we actually deploy our application, because in here, you'll have to add a different URL because now it works only on our local host. Okay, great. So we can copy our client ID. We can come back to our application. And now inside of here, we can simply paste that ID right in here. With that said, I'm interested to see what this response is going to be and how does our button look like. So I can close this tab for now and go back to our Memories project. As you can see, we have our Google sign in button right here. Looks like it's connected all the way to our front button. So what I'm going to do right now is just switch them. So I'm going to switch our Google login and our normal login button right there. So now we have our manual login button on top of our Google login. And there we go. That looks so much better. So now the question is, if I open the console, what is our response going to look like once I click Google sign in? Okay, so right now we get redirect URI mismatch. That means that we have to go back to our APIs and services, meaning console.developers.google.com, and we have to see if we have set up everything correctly. Okay, inside of here, we do see that we have our Memories app OAuth client. So maybe we have to add the localhost 3000 /auth to here as well. But you can see that it cannot contain a path or end with that. So that's not going to be the solution. What about if we add the HTTP right there and not HTTPS? Let's try with that. That works. So maybe definitely that's the solution. Let's save it. And let's try one more time in our Memories app. Okay, if we click the Google sign in now, as you can see, we get this nice window from Google. But before we go ahead and click anywhere else, I just noticed that we have one more thing that we have to do. Our Google success function is going to be asynchronous. That means that we have to add an async keyword in front of this function. Now, let's save it, go back, and now finally, let's click that Google sign in. This is crazy because we didn't code any of this. Google automatically gave us this window. So now I'll try to log in with JavaScript Mastery. And take a look at that. We got Google sign in was unsuccessful, not as I supposed it to be. But that's normal, errors happen. So along with this console log Google sign in was unsuccessful, I'll also try to console log the error. So inside of here, we can console log error. Okay, we got an error right there. And I'll try to copy the details and paste them right in here so that we can both see what our Google says. I'm going to extend this into multiple rows. Usually you should not share your client's ID with everyone, but I'm going to delete this after recording the video, so it's okay. Okay, so the error says not a valid origin for the client HTTP localhost 3000 has not been whitelisted for client ID. Please go to, they give us the URL, and whitelist origin for your project's client ID. After a bit of Googling, I found out that the issue was not that we had to add something to our Google Developers Console or something to our code. We simply had to clean the cookies. So let me show you the solution that I found. The solution was on Stack Overflow, and what you simply had to do is clear the browser's cache. So in Chrome Settings, Advanced, clear browsing data, cached images, and files. And that's it. That's gonna do the trick. So after you do that and come back to the site, if you click Google Sign In, take a look. Right now, you can see all the details right here, which means our login was successful. Also, while we're here, let's get rid of this boring warning. It simply says invalid prop input props of type boolean supplied to forward ref text field. That means that if we go back into our input component right here, this is getting a boolean. And that means that in this case, we cannot use the end. We rather have to use the null because this cannot be a boolean. It has to be a null or a specific component. So if we save that, the error is gone. And as we discussed, our sign in works beautifully. Now we have to use some of these details we got right in our response. And we can use them right inside of here. Auth Google success. Now we have access to this entire object. So what do we need? Well, we can say const result is equal to res, and now we can use the optional chaining operator, the question mark dot. The question mark dot is a special operator that's not going to throw an error if we don't have access to the res object, because maybe sometimes we're not going to have this res object, so we want to make sure that we don't get an error if we don't have it. That way you can say profile obj. So now we are not going to get an error if this doesn't exist. Before, if you use just the dot, if the res object didn't exist, then you would get an error saying cannot get property profile obj of undefined, because res profile obj would be undefined. If you do this, it's not going to throw you an error, it's simply going to say undefined. That's going to be the value of the result. Great. So now we know how the optional chaining operator works. And now that I think about it, it's kind of crazy that I knew the exact error message that we would get if we didn't use this. Yeah, so with that said, let's continue. We also want to get the token, and we can get the token from res question mark dot token ID. So now we have the token and we have the result. That's basically everything that we need. Since we're working with an async function, we can use the try and catch block. So now if our login is successful, we want to dispatch something. Otherwise, we're simply going to console log the error. So how do we dispatch something? Well, of course, we have to import use dispatch from Redux. So inside of here, I'm going to say import use dispatch, and that's going to be coming from React-Redux. Of course, since it's a hook, you need to say const dispatch is equal to use dispatch. And finally, we can use that dispatch an action. So we can say dispatch, call it as a function, and now inside of there, we can send some data in. The type of our action is going to be simply auth, and then the data we'll be sending in is going to be the payload, and all that we want to send is a new object that contains the result and the token. That is going to be it. Now that we're dispatching this action and we're sending the payload in, the only thing we have to do is add a reducer that's going to handle it properly. So let's go to our reducers folder, and then in there, we need to create the reducers for the auth. So inside of here, I'm going to say new file auth.js. Inside of here, as always, we need to create a basic reducer. So we're going to do the same thing that we did in the posts. First, we need to import some of the constants. In this case, we're not going to have these. What we want to have is going to be the auth and the logout. Of course, these are constants in the action types constants. So we can go to this folder, action types. And now inside of here, let's create those. Export const, and that is going to be auth is equal to a string of auth. And this one is also going to be logout. Just to reiterate, we're doing this to save ourselves the trouble of accidentally misspelling a variable, because that way we wouldn't have the error. This way, since everything is a variable, if we misspell something, we are going to get an error. Okay, let's create our reducer. Const auth reducer. Reducers are functions, more specifically functions that are accepting the state and an action. Based on that, they have a switch case. In the switch case, we're looking for the action.type. In this case, it can be something like auth, and it can also be logout, which we're going to implement later on. So if our action type is equal to auth what do we want to do? Well, remember, we're getting all of the details inside of the action.payload, or more specifically, we call it data. So let's first try to console log that to see what are we getting. So inside of here, I'll try to get action.data. I'm also going to use the question mark because not always is that data going to be there. And that's it. Let's try to console log it and see if we're getting it. Of course, we have to export default auth reducer. And we also have to use it in the index.js of our reducers. So in our index.js, we have to import not only the post reducer, but also the auth reducer. And then we have to use it here in combine reducers and combine the auth as well. Not to forget, we always have to return something. So if we don't have any case in here, I'm going to return just the old state. But in this case, we also need to return something. So for now, until we're just console logging things, I'm going to just return the state. And right now our state is undefined, so we have to give it a default value. So I'm going to say equal to, and now I'm going to say auth data is equal to null. So if we don't have anything, our auth data of the state is simply going to be set to nothing. If we save that, let's take a look. What do we get? Okay, one more time through the process, click Google sign in. Okay, and take a look. This is our whole thing. We have a result in here. We have JavaScript mastery. We have our Google ID, and we have our token. That's all that we need. So what do we do with that? Well, we want to save it in the local storage because that way, once we refresh the page, the browser is still going to know that we are logged in. So to do that, we can say local storage dot set item is equal to profile. Then we want to say json.stringify, and then there we want to say action question mark data. This is it. So we are setting all of this that we have, all of the data for the login, we're setting that to the local storage. Finally, at the end, we want to return something. We're going to return state, and then we want to specify the auth data to be equal to action.data. And this action data is also going to use optional chaining. So this is it for the auth. Now that we have this return right there and we are setting our profile with the data field for the user, we can try to use it somewhere. The best place to use it would be a navbar, because in here we already have our user, which is currently set to null. So now let's try to add a real user in here. To do that, we can create a new state field, and we can do something like user, const user, and set user. And finally, in there, we can use the use state. Use state, of course, has to be imported. So inside of here, I'm going to import the use state as well as the use effect, because we'll need to use that later on. Now, this use effect is going to be a bit different. We're immediately going to try to fetch something, and that something is going to be the actual user. So how do we retrieve something from the local storage? We say json.parse local storage .get item, and then you specify the name of that item. In this case, it is going to be the profile. So this is how we can get the user right here. Now that we have the user, let's try to simply console log him. Console log user. I'm going to go back to the browser and refresh the page. So currently the user is null because remember, last time we didn't save it in the local storage. So if I open the application tab and right here refresh, you can see we don't have anything in the local storage. But now let me try to log in one more time with my Google account. And there we go. We have our complete information. Now, if I go to memories, are we going to get the console log with that profile? It is still null. If we refresh though, it is there. And as you can see, this automatically filled with JavaScript mastery and my icon. So that is amazing. One bad thing is that we had to refresh and manually head back to the localhost 3000 and not the login form. So let's re-navigate automatically so we don't have to do it manually. We can do that using a use effect. Inside of here, I'm going to use a use effect. It's going to accept a callback function, and of course it needs to have a dependency array. in this use effect, we're going to check for the token. So we're going to say if token exists, user, and then question mark dot, the optional chaining, token. So we're checking if the token exists, and if it does, we're setting it to the token variable. Then finally, later on, we're going to check for the JSON web token here if we do the manual sign up, but now we're using Google, so we don't have to do that. But what we can do is we can say set user, and set user is equal to, again, the same thing. That thing is going to be our user, json.parse local storage.get item. And finally, we have to do one more change in the auth. More specifically, once we dispatch this, we actually have to redirect back to the home. So for that, we can use history.push like this. And where do we push to? We push to /. History belongs to React Router DOM, so we have to import that. Import use history from React Router DOM. And then right in here, we need to say const history is equal to use history and call it, of course. Okay, so now this should redirect us immediately to the home page once we log in. Let's try to log out. Oh, our logout doesn't work right now, but if we head manually to /auth, there we go, and we can click Google sign in. Once that is done, as you saw, we were automatically redirected. The thing that would make sense to do right now is to simply do the logout. So that's going to be our next step. To implement the logout, we of course have to find where this button is. And as you can see, it is in the navbar. So if we go right here, let's find that button, logout, and we're going to add an on-click listener. What are we going to do on the on-click? We're simply going to log out. That logout is going to be one function inside of this navbar. More specifically, const logout is equal to an arrow function. And what are we going to do? We're going to dispatch an action. So we have to first import use dispatch from React Redux. And then in here at the top, we need to say const dispatch is equal to use dispatch. There we go. Now in the logout, what we can simply say is dispatch, and we're dispatching an action that has a type of, we can do just a string of logout. And that's going to be it. Once we log out, we also want to redirect to the main route. So I'm going to say history.push. And also we have to import that history. So at the top, we're going to say import use history from, that's going to be React Router DOM. I see that we already have it. So I'm going to move the import right here. And how do we get it? Well, const history is equal to use history. So once somebody logs out, we're going to push them to the root route to the home. There we go. What do we also have to do is we have to set the user equal to null. So if somebody is logged out, the user has to be null. Okay, and I think with that, right now, we don't even need this use effect. We're gonna need that for the JSON Web Token. So I'm gonna comment that out. And let's see if our flow now completely works. So we are right there. I'm gonna refresh the page. I logged out. There we go, we are logged out. I'll check the application tab. Looks like we still have our profile there. And as you can see, if we refresh, it comes back. That means that we haven't fully implemented the logout dispatch. So we need to go to reducers, auth, and then in here, we have to do something if we log out. More specifically, it is going to be really simple. If we have the logout case like this, then what we have to do is say local storage dot clear. This is going to completely clear the entire local storage. And what do we want to return? Well, the same thing that we're returning right here, except the auth data is going to stay null. Okay, great. So now if we go back, refresh the page, we have our JavaScript mastery there. I'm going to click logout. As you can see, the console was cleared. And if I refresh, there we go. Our user is still logged out. Now let's try to go to the whole process of signing in. Go here, sign in using Google. There we go. We are logged in. And as you can see, our profile is populated, and when we refresh, we get this JavaScript mastery. I don't like that we had to refresh to get the user who's logged in name. So we have to go back, and looks like that in the nav bar, which is right here, we still need that use effect. So I'm gonna add that use effect. So when do we wanna call this use effect? As soon as the URL changes from the /auth to the simply /. And we can use the property use location from React Router DOM. We need to do the same thing. Const location is equal to use location. And based on this, we'll have access to that change. When this changes, we want to simply call the user. When location changes, I can put that right here. When location changes, simply set the user. Now let's take a look if that's going to work. If I go back, log out one more time, log in, and there we go. Now we immediately got this user right there because we automatically set the user profile once we came back from the /auth and it was populated. Amazing. And now if you refresh the page, go back, go somewhere else, you're still going to be logged in for I think about an hour because our token lasts for about an hour. Or if you want to manually log out, you can simply do that right away. Crazy how simple the Google OAuth system is, right? We implemented this in a really short amount of time. Next step is to implement the manual login and registration system using the JSON Web Token. For that, we're going to use this form that we created. Let's start working on that. I'm going to close all of these files just so we have a clean working environment. I'm also going to collapse all the files and folders. So this is now going to be a first time in this video that we are going to focus on the backend as well, because we have to create the models for the user as well as the controllers and the routes for the login and registration. For now, let's handle the client side of the authentication system. To do that, we have to go to our auth form right inside of here. And now remember, whenever you're working on something, take a look at the actual JSX and then ask yourself, when is this happening? And the answer is our login and registration is happening after the user clicks this button. That means that we have to focus to implement actions once this button is clicked. Going back to here, we can see that our button is right here. If you take a closer look at this button, you can see that once you click it, it is of type submit. That means that the only thing it does is it calls this onSubmit function. In this case, the onSubmit function is the handle submit. So let's see where is that. And there we go. It's right in here. More specifically, it is empty, so we're not doing anything with it right now. Now, what do we have to do with it to make our login work? First thing to do would be to check if we have access to all of the state fields. More specifically, are the values of these inputs in the state? And right now, we cannot see that we are mentioning state nowhere, right? And while we're here, I also noticed that this should be a last name and also in here, a last name. Yeah, so we're never ever mentioning state. So how can we do that? Well, let's create a new state field right inside of here. Const, and we can call it something like form data. Form data, set form data, and that is going to be equal to use state. Of course, we have to make this use state at the start be equal to something. So just at the top of our component, let's create a new field. Const initial state is going to be equal to, and now in here, we have to put the initial values for all of the state fields. That is going to be, for example, the first name, which is going to be equal to an empty string. Then we have the last name, also equal to an empty string. We have the email. Again, everything is going to be an empty string. We have the password, and we have the confirm password, also equal to an empty string. And that is going to be it for our initial state. Now, how do we use it? Well, you simply put it in here. That is going to be the initial state of the form data. Okay, now let's try to console log the form data on submit. And obviously, immediately, considering that we are never setting form data, we expect that to be empty. So let's take a look. If we go back in here, if I type something and if I type a password, I'm going to open up the console right here and click sign in. And first of all, it immediately refreshed. That's because it is the default behavior of the browser to refresh on form submit. So we have to add the event. In here, we get the event e.prevent default. That is something that you always add on the form submit in React, because there we don't prefer reloads. We always want to have something on the screen. So with that said, let's see if we get something there. I'm going to type the same thing one more time and click sign in. And as we expected, we got all of the fields there because that is our initial state, but they are all an empty string. Now the question is, how can we populate these fields? And the easy answer is to look just a bit below our handle submit. We have the handle change, and each one of our inputs is using that handle change, but right now it is empty. So what do we have to do to fill it? Well, in here we get the actual event, and then what we can do is say set form data. We get an object, right? We spread the form form data, and then we update only a specific input that we're currently managing. And the question is, how can we know on which input are we currently? Well, each one of the inputs has its own name. First of all, you have to make sure that your names are exactly the same as the names in the initial state right here. First name, last name, email, password, confirm password, and so on. If that's the case, you can use these square brackets right there and say e.target.name, and that's going to be equal to e.target.value. This is going to make sure to spread all of the other properties, but only change the one specific one you're currently on with the target value. That means the current input that we have in there. With that said, if we save that, let's try one more time and see what we have in this form. So I'll first try to enter something. And there we go. We have our email and we have our password. If I switch to here, we have our first name. And if I click sign up, there we go. We have all of our values listed right in here. So that's why we had to use the same handle change function for each one, because otherwise you would have to change each state field separately, which is quite a lot of code. This way, it is a lot easier. This is dynamic and works for infinite number of fields. With that said, that's great. Now we have our handle submit, but the question is, what do we want to do on that submit? Well, there are going to be two different types of submits. One is going to be our sign up, and the other one is going to be our sign in. So we already have a variable to check that. So we can say if is sign up. In that case, we want to do the logic to sign up the user. Else, if we're not on the sign up, we want to do the logic to sign in the user. So in this case, what we want to do is we want to dispatch an action, and more specifically, that is going to be a sign up action. And to that action, we want to pass in the entire form data, and we also want to pass the history. We pass the form data so, well, we can have it in our database, of course, but we pass the history object so that we can navigate once something happens. Okay, great. And the other one, we can copy this and simply put it right there. This one is going to be sign in. All of these are actions that we have to import first. So just above, I'm going to import these two actions. Inside of here, I'm going to say import sign in and sign up. And that's going to be from // actions and then auth. This file doesn't exist yet, but we are going to create it right now. Okay, so if we save that, we are ready to start creating the actions file. That's going to be inside of the actions, and we simply need to do auth.js. Inside of here, we can start creating our auth actions. First of all, we're going to need some things from here, like constants, action types, and all of the things from the API. So let's copy these and simply paste them right here. In this case, we won't need those. The ones that we need is simply going to be auth. And from the API, later on, we're going to use some of the calls. But right now, we don't need anything. So let's start with creating the actions. While we're creating them, we can also export them. That's going to mean export const, and we named it sign in. That is going to be an action creator, which is a function that simply returns an action. And as we discussed in the last video, if actions, or more specifically action creators, are asynchronous, then we have to use Redux Thunk, meaning we have a function that returns an async function with a dispatch. I know it's a crazy syntax, but we just have to follow the rules in this case. So we have this, and then we have async dispatch function, which then has a function block. In here, we get what we passed into our function. So we passed the form data and we passed in the history. So we can repeat that here, form data and history. If you're in an async block of code, we can use the try and catch, and now in here we can do the logic. If you remember what we were doing in the posts actions, you can see that in here we were trying to fetch some of the things from the database. And that's going to be the same thing that we're going to do right in here. In here, we're going to try to get the data for the sign in, or rather, we're going to send the data to the database or to the backend so that it knows to sign in the user. Right now, we don't have the backend endpoints for this to actually work. So this is going to be a good time to transfer back to the backend. Before we do that though, let's just create a complete mock of the sign in and the sign up, and then we'll move to the backend. So for now, in here, I'm just gonna say log in the user. And then finally, why do we have that history? Because we want to navigate to the home page. So that means that we can do history.push and then simply push the slash. After we log in the user, we push to the home page. And then in the catch, for now, we can simply console log the error. Okay, and now I'm gonna copy this and do the same thing for the sign up. I'm gonna just rename this to sign up. We also get the form data and the history. We get the dispatch, and in this case, we need to sign up the user. And then finally, we navigate to the home page and console log the error. And now we're pretty much done with the front-end side for now. Of course, later on the backend, while we create those endpoints, then in here, we'll be able to call them. But for now, there's not really a lot we can do on the front-end side. Now we need to move to the backend, create the user model, create the controllers and the routes, and then we'll be able to continue. So let's do that. As before, I closed all the windows, collapsed the folders, and let's start with the backend. We can focus on the routes first. More specifically, in the index.js, we need to add the routes for the users. So instead of here, I'm gonna say app.use. We're gonna use the user endpoint, and then in that case, we're gonna have the routes called user routes. Those user routes, as you can see, they're undefined yet, but we have to import them as we imported the post routes. So I'm going to copy this line and just change this to user routes, and that's going to be coming from /routes and users.js. Now we know that we have to create the routes right inside of here, users.js. So how are these routes going to look like? Well, first we have to have the basic structure as we already have with this thing. We have to import express from express. Then we have to get some of the controllers from our controllers. Right now we don't have any. Then we have to create the instance of a router. And finally, we have to export default router. Before we export the router, we of course have to add those routes. And you add them in the following manner. Router that, and this is going to be a post route to /sign in. Why is this a post route? Because you have to send some data to the backend. More specifically, you have to send all of the details from the form to the backend. The form sign in and sign up is the best way to explain how does the post request work. You need it to be a post request because you have to send all of the information from the login form to the backend, and then backend does something based on that information. In this case, it's going to sign in the user. So what are we going to do when we go to the sign in? Well, we're going to call our sign in controller. And I'm going to copy this one more time. We have the sign up as well, and this is going to be sign up. Obviously, these are undefined right now, so let's import them from here, sign in, and also sign up. Of course, these are not coming from the posts, they will be coming from user.js of controllers. So in here, we can create user.js of controllers, and this is going to be the place where we're going to put all the complex logic of actually signing in and signing up the user. In this file, we're going to need a few things. First, we're going to need a package called bcrypt. Bcrypt is used to hash the password. Of course, if you're creating your users want to have some security. If your database is hacked and if you're storing your passwords in a plain text, everybody will be able to see it. If you hash the passwords, that won't be the case. That's why we use bcrypt. We can say import bcrypt from bcrypt.js like this, and we also need JWT. JWT stands for JSON Web Token, and that is a safe way for us to store the users, or more specifically, store the user in a browser for some period of time. For example, for an hour, 2 hours, or even a week. That way, if user leaves the site, he will still be able to stay logged in no matter what. In this file, we have to use the user model, which we haven't created yet. So now would be a good time to create the user model. Inside of here, I'm gonna create a user.js file that is inside of the models. Now the situation is gonna be similar to what we have with the post message. We have to import mongoose, we have to create a schema, and finally we have to create a model, which we then export. So let's repeat the process. Import mongoose from mongoose, then const user schema is equal to mongoose.schema. Make sure to put the capital S right here. And there we have an object. Now inside of that object, you put all of the necessary details. We have a name, and name is going to be required. So inside of here, we can say name, type is going to be of a string, and required is going to be set to true. Then we have an email. Email is also going to be of a type string, and required is going to be set to true. We have a password. Password is also going to be of a type string, and the required is going to be set to true. And then we have the ID. ID is going to have a type of string. And that is going to be it for this user schema. Finally, we can say export default mongoose.model. You need to specify the user model with a capital U, and you need to specify a schema on which that model is built upon. And in this case, that is going to be the user schema. Now in the controllers, we can import that model, the user model, and then based on that, we can create a lot of instances of users, our memories MERN project users. So for that, we can say import user from models/user.js. And now we can create our controllers. We know that we need to have two. One is going to be export const sign in, and that is going to be an async function. On all of the controllers, we have the rec and the res, which is the request and the response, and we have a function block. This is going to be the function for the sign in, and I'm going to copy this and simply replicate it for the sign up. So now the question is, how does the logic for the sign in and the sign up look like? That could be a complex part, right? Well, both yes and no. It can be daunting if you're just starting with it or if you're trying to build this yourself for the first time. But in this case, you're watching this tutorial and I'll try to be as thorough as possible and guide you step by step through how to do this. Usually all sign-in, sign-up projects are similar. In any application, you need to have a sign-in system. So once you know how to do this once, you'll be able to mostly duplicate the code and achieve the same purpose in any app that you build. First of all, for the sign-in, we're going to get two things from the front end. And those things are going to be the email and the password. So the question is, how are we getting it from the front end? Whenever you have a post request, you get all the data through the request.body. We can say const and then destructure the email and the password from rec.body. So we're destructuring that. All the post data that you send is going to be available for you in the rec.body. Okay, now that we have these values, what do? Well, we are in an async block, so I'm going to open a try and catch. If we are signing in, we first have to find the old user, right? So I can say const old, or we can better say existing user, and that is going to be equal to await user.find1, and we find the user by email. That means that we are searching for the existing user in the database, because if you're signing in, we cannot simply create a new one. We need to find the old one or the existing in the database. In this case, we're going to say if no existing user, then we're going to simply return res.status 404 because it means we cannot find it, and then .json. The message is going to be equal to user doesn't exist. That is it. That's if we don't have the existing user in the database. If that is not the case, we have to check if the password is correct. So if the new password that the user typed in is the same one to the password used when he or she initially created the account. We can say const is password correct. And that is going to be equal to await bcrypt dot compare. And what we want to compare is the password to existing user dot password. We cannot simply do a normal string check because before, or rather later, when we implement the bcrypt, we're going to hash the password. So we still have to use bcrypt to compare the hashed passwords and see if they're the same. Then we can do one more check and say if no is password correct. So if the password is not correct, return res.status. That's going to be 400.json. And in there, we're going to have a message. And what we can say is simply invalid credentials. Okay, that's good. And moving on, if the user already exists in the database and if the password is correct, then we can finally get his JSON web token that we need to send to the front end. So to do that, I'm going to say const token is equal to JSON web token dot sign. And in there, we have to provide all the information that we want to store in the token. In this case, we could store the email. Email is going to be equal to existing user dot email. And we also want to keep the ID, which is going to be equal to existing user dot ID, or it's going to be dot underscore ID. Don't forget that underscore with the ID. The second argument to the JSON web token sign is the secret. Instead of here, you have to have the secret string that only you know. Usually, you would put it in a separate env file where you store all of your variables where nobody else can see. In this case, we can simply say test right there, and that is going to be enough. As this is a YouTube video, I'm trying to keep it as concise as possible. If you'd like me to make a separate video of this series where I go through the entire project and just apply all of the best possible programming habits to it, like move all of the things that should be saved to somewhere else and refactor the code and so on, feel free to let me know in the comments. For now, we're gonna simply leave this as test. Finally, the last thing is the options object. So inside of here, one of the options we'll use is expires in. And we're gonna say expires in 1 hour, just 1H. And that is going to be it for our token. Finally, now that we have the token, the last thing that we have to do is simply return it. So we can say res.status. Status is going to be equal to 200. And .json, what are we sending? We're sending the result, which is going to be equal to the existing user, or rather the user that's trying to log in. And we send over the token that we just created here on the backend. If the token creation didn't went successfully, we can say res.status 500. That means an undefined server error. And then we can say JSON, and what are we returning? Well, just a message that says something went wrong. We don't really have the info on what went wrong. And this is it. This is our sign in controller. Of course, more important part, at least right now, is to create the sign up. That way we'll be able to add the user to the database. So let's add the sign up right now. It's going to be quite similar, but it's going to have a few distinct differences. Again, we want to get something from the rec.body. Rec.body, we're destructuring the things that we sent over. And remember, what do we have on the front-end side when we are signing up? We have, first of all, the email, password, and then we have the first name and the last name as well. We also have the confirm password field. Don't forget about that. Okay, so now that we're getting all the data, let's start with the logic. We again have the try and catch block. And in this case, we are also going to try to find the existing user. So we can say const existing user, and this is going to be the same as we had right here. So we try to find a user with that email. Why do we do that if you're signing up? Think about it. We cannot create an account if there already is an existing user. So in this case, I'm going to copy the same line that we have right there, But in this case, I'm not going to say if not existing user. I'm going to say if existing user. That's the problem right there. And then what do we want to return? Res status, that's going to be 400. And we're going to say user already exists. Moving forward, if we don't have the existing user, that means that we're good to go to create an account, but we first have to check if the password is the same to the confirmed password. So we can say password is equal to confirm password, or rather we can say if the password is not equal to the confirmed password. In that case, we're going to return this same error right here. So I'm going to paste that, return. And in this case, we're going to say passwords don't match. That means that the user has to re-enter them one more time. Okay, great. Moving forward, if we don't have the existing user and if the passwords match, that means that we're good to go to create a user. Before we create him though, we have to hash the password because we don't want to store it in a plain text. To do that, we can say const hashed password, and that's going to be equal to await bcrypt dot hash. And then in here, we simply pass in the password. The second thing that you pass is called salt, and that is the level of difficulty that you want to use to hash your password. People usually use 12. Okay, so now that we have the hashed password, we have to create our user. I'm gonna say const result is going to be equal to await user.create. And how do we create a user? We have to pass in all the data. We pass in the email, we pass in the password, but take care, it's going to be hashed password in this case. Then we pass the name. The name in this case is going to be a template string where we first take the first name and then add a comma and then add a space and then enter the last name. So we're going to combine the first name and the last name together, just like this. Okay, now that we created the user, we also have to create the token. So I'm going to copy this line from above. Const token is equal to JSON WT JSON web token.sign. Email is going to be equal to result.email, and ID is going to be equal to result._ID. The secret is going to stay the same, and expires in is also going to stay the same. Finally, after this is all successful, we have to return our user. So I'm going to copy the return from the line above, and what we can say is res.status 200 means everything went good, and we send the result. In this case, the user itself is the result, and we also send in the token. If something went wrong, of course, in here, we can simply send res.status 500, something went wrong. And this is it. Now we have the controllers for the sign in and the sign up. This alone should be able to allow us to log in and register. I'm really trying to be thorough explaining this because I know it's a hard concept. I'm really glad we went through this hard part. It's definitely not easy, so make sure to rewatch it if you don't understand some of the parts. If you like my current way of teaching, definitely make sure to leave a like and comment. It really helps with the YouTube algorithm. With that said, let's move to the second step. And that is, once the user is actually logged in, he can do all kinds of actions. He can delete a post that he created, he can like it, he can like all the other posts, and our backend needs to be able to basically say, okay, you are allowed to do that. You are a real user, you're currently logged in, and you can do that. For that, we use something known as middleware. So our next step is going to be creating authentication middleware. To create any kind of middleware, we can create a middleware folder. So right inside of the server, we can create a middleware folder. You can see if you use some kind of icon theme like Material UI icons, it's automatically going to get a different look. Inside of there, I'm simply going to say auth.js because the middleware inside of here is going to be for auth. Right now, you might not understand what a middleware means. It's a specific name, but as soon as we create it, I'm going to show you where that piece of the puzzle is going to fit in. As I show you that, it's going to make complete sense. So for now, let's start with the middleware. We're going to import JWT from JSON web token. Then we're going to create our auth function. So we can say const auth, and it's going to be equal to an async function where we have a rec res, and the next. Even by looking at this, you can immediately see that our middleware is really similar to what we have on our controllers. They all have the rec and the res. But our auth middleware has something known as next. That means do something and then move to the next thing. Again, you're going to see it in just a few moments in action. But now inside of there, we're going to add a try and catch block. For the catch, we're going to simply console log the error for now. And now in the try block, we have to see if the user is really who he is claiming to be. And we can do that using JSON Web Token. So after the user is signed up or signed in, he gets this specific token. Now when he wants to do something like a post or delete a post, we have to check if his token is valid. And that's what we're doing right here. So to get the token from the front end, we can say const token is equal to rec.headers.authorization .split, so we split it, and we only want the token itself, and the token is on the first position in the array after we split it. Then we're going to have two kinds of tokens. We're going to have the one from the Google auth, and we're going to have our own. So inside of here, we can decide if it is our own or the Google auth. That's going to be a variable where we're going to say is custom auth. And if the token dot length is lower than 500, then it means that it is our own. If token length is greater than 500, that is going to be Google auth. Then we can create a variable called decoded data. So that is the data that we want to get from the token itself. And now, finally, if we have the token and if the token is our own. So if it is a custom auth, in that case, we want to set the decoded data to be equal to JSON Web Token.verify. This is going to give us the data from each specific token. It's going to give us the username of the person and its ID. Inside of here, we have to pass the token and we need to have that secret we were talking about. In this case, we know that the secret is test. It has to be the same secret you used when you were creating that specific token. You can see right here we use test and in here we use test. And now that we have the decoded data, we know which user is logged in and which user is, for example, liking the post or deleting the post. So we're going to store his ID in the rec.user_id. So rec.user_id is going to be equal to decoded data $dot for the optional chaining ID. Okay, this is how we get the user's ID if we are working with our own token. And if you're working with the Google's OAuth token, we're going to do the same thing. Decoded data is going to be equal to JSON Web Token.decode. In this case, it's going to be decode and simply pass in the token. In this case, we don't need the secret. Once we have that, the situation is going to be similar. Rec.user_id is equal to decoded data $dot, and in this case we're going to say something known as sub. Sub is simply Google's name for a specific ID that differentiates every single Google user. Basically, it's an ID that we can differentiate the users with. Finally, we can call the next so that we can pass the action onto the second thing. For example, if the user wanted to like a post, so let's say a user went and he wants to like a post, he has to do this. Click the like button, and then this is what happens. First, we don't immediately like it because we are not sure if he has permissions to like it. First, we go through the auth middleware, okay? Auth middleware confirms or denies that request. So if all of this is correct, we're going to call the next and we're going to say, okay, you're okay to like that post. So if auth middleware says, okay, you're good to go, only then are we going to call the like controller. And this is what middleware is for any kind of action that happens before something. This next thing is crucial. We are saying do this and then do something next. Do something after this is done. And that is a middleware. Okay, with that said, we can finally export default auth. Now the question is, where do we use that auth middleware? And the answer is in the routes. For example, we said when somebody likes something. In that case, we want to use that middleware. So first of all, let's import it. Import auth from /middleware /auth. And we're on a backend, so we have to do the auth.js. Okay, this is going to be our middleware. Now we want to add it before specific actions. For example, all of the users, no matter if they're logged in or not, they can see all the posts. But to create a post, you need to have your own ID. You need to be logged in. Then in this case, I noticed that this is an extra action that we don't need, so we can delete this one because we don't have a specific memory page. We can implement that in one of the future videos. Then we have the edit post or update post. In there, we definitely need to have the auth happening before because we need to see if the user has the permission to update a post. Same thing happens for deletion. Do we have the right to delete that post? And finally, the same thing happens for liking. Why? Although everybody has the permission to like something, he cannot like twice or 3 times. That's why we need to call the auth before to have the specific user's ID, and he can only like once for that specific ID. Great. Now we know how to create auth and also where to add it. Now the majority of our backend work is done, but we still have to implement the logic for example, liking only one specific post. Right now you can like as many times as you want. We also need to implement the logic for deleting only the post that you created, or same for updating the post only that you created. You cannot simply update or delete any post that's there. And that's going to be it. This one, the like post, is going to be managed on the backend. And if I'm not mistaken, the delete post and update post are going to be managed on the front end, because what we have to do to disable the user from deleting something? Well, if he's not the creator of the post, simply remove the delete button. It's not going to even be there. He won't be able to click it. There we go. So while we're in the backend, we're going to focus on completing it. So now our next step is to implement the like post, only a single one. And then we're going to move to the front end to finalize the things with the auth and with the update and delete post. Starting with the like controller, that's the one that we created in the last video inside of the post.js of controllers. If you scroll a bit down, you should see a like post controller. Now we have to modify it so that the users can only like the post once. So let's do that. First of all, we have to see if a user is even authenticated. We can do that because now we have that special value, and that is rec.userID. This is really important to mention. If you call a middleware like this before a specific action, like in this case, then you can populate the request and then you'll have access to that request right into the next action that you have. So if we go into our auth and then in here, if we populate the request.userID, then we go to the next controller in the row, which is going to be the like post. Now the request is going to have that user ID property. With this, we can check something. We can say if no rec.userID, that means that the user is not authenticated. And we can simply say return res.json, and then message is going to be equal to unauthenticated. In here, we have the same old check to see if we do have the post that the user wants to like. Then we get the actual post. And now we have to see if the user's ID is already in the likes section or is it not. So we can say const index is equal to post.likes.findIndex. Inside of here, we have a callback function where we loop through all the IDs. So each like is going to be the ID from a specific person. That's how we're going to know who liked the specific post. And what we have to do is we have to say if ID is equal to, we have to convert his user ID to a string, and then we can say if the ID is equal to string of rec.userID. If that is the case, that means that his ID is already in there. That means that that person already liked the post, and this is going to be a dislike and not the like. So how do we do that? We can say if index is triple equal to -1. Only if his ID is not in here, only then is this going to be equal to -1. So this is if he wants to like the post. Else, we're going to get the index of his specific like. In that case, we want to delete his like, or rather dislike a post. Great. So what is going to be the logic for adding the like? That is going to be really simple. Post.likes.push rec.user ID. We're basically just pushing his ID. And if we want to remove his like, we need to remove his ID from the likes array. That's going to be like this. Post.likes is equal to post.likes.filter. Our filter accepts a callback function, and it's going to loop through all the IDs. You can see likes are going to be IDs. And then in here, we have to filter out the like from the current person. We can do that by saying ID is not equal to string of rec.user ID. And this is simply going to return us the array of all the likes besides the current person's like. Now that we have the current number of likes, we are going to create the updated post, and that is going to be the same as we have it here, post message.find by ID and update. But in this case, we're not going to update only the likes or the like count. We don't have that anymore. We're simply going to create a new post. So the post that we had, we're going to update it because now we have the same old post that now includes the like itself. One more thing that we have to do is add the actual likes to each post. That is going to be in the post message model right here. So far, what we had was the like count. We no longer have the like count. We're going to have likes, the array of likes. Inside of there, the type is actually going to be an array of strings. This is how we write that. So the array of IDs. And then the default value is going to be an empty array. Great. Now this is done. Make sure to save all the files, and now we will be able to go to the front-end part and see if we can make the calls to the sign in and the sign up routes and controllers. This is the thing with backend. If you work with the backend, most likely you have to write a lot of things and not visually see something. That's just how it is with the backend. But now we're going to move back to the front end since we're building a full stack app, and we will be able to see the logic that we implemented on the backend. I closed all the windows just so it's easier for us to go back to the front end, and let's focus on important things. Inside of our actions, more specifically auth actions, we said that we need to log in the user. But at the time, we didn't have the actual endpoints on the backend that we needed to contact. Now we do have them. So that is our next step, to log in or to sign up the user. For that, we're first going to create API endpoints, like we did for all of our actions with the posts. Now we need to create these only for the authentication. Before we start with that, we're first going to do some updates to our current setup. I'm going to create an Axios instance, const API, and that is going to be equal to axios.create. Inside of here, we can create a base URL. So we can put options like this, an empty object, and then inside of there, you can specify the base URL. Now we're going to set the base URL to be a string of http:/localhost and then 5000, just like so. We don't want to have that /posts because now we're going to have the API also to make some different calls, for example, to the users and not only to the posts. Now we can delete this. And now, instead of to Axios, we'll be making all of our requests to the uppercase API. This is going to do the same thing, absolutely the same thing, but now you don't have to specify the starting part of this URL. So how do you change that? Well, now it's not going to be api.get/URL. It is simply going to be /posts. We always have to add that. In this case, we also want to reach out to something like /posts. That's the same. In this case, it is going to be /posts and then /ID and then /like post. In this case, posts only /posts. And in this case, also posts. We already have the ID. We did that so that later on we can use some more advanced features of Axios, some of the features that are not often mentioned in easy tutorials and are definitely a good thing to know. Before that though, let's simply create the routes for the sign in and the sign up. Export const sign in, that is going to be an arrow function, and that arrow function is going to accept the form data. So what do we call once we make that request? API.post, and that's going to be a post request to /users/sign in. Finally, as the post payload, we want to send the form data. I'm going to replicate this request, and we're just going to rename it to sign up right here. And we also have to rename it right here, sign up. Everything else should be the same. With that said, we can go back to our actions right here. And now we have those API calls, the sign in and the sign up. So what we can do is we can say const destructure the data from our request and make that equal to await API.sign in. Of course, we have to pass the form data. And I know this Redux flow can be confusing. Like we have this form data here, we have it in the API, then we're passing it from here. Where is that coming from? Where is that going to? How do we get to the reducers? I know that can be confusing. So one more time, let me give you the whole explanation of the Redux workflow. First, we get to the actual form. The form is a component right here in the auth. Once we fill in all the inputs, we want to dispatch something. Dispatch immediately has something to do with Redux. We are dispatching an action. This action is called sign up, for example. Let's do sign in this case. So we're dispatching a sign in action, and we're giving it two different things, the form data and the history. Once we dispatch that, we come to our actions, and that is this thing. We're dispatching this whole action. Now this action makes another call to our API, just so we know where we're going. And it's basically this. It makes a post request, says, hey database, get me some data and return it to me. And right in our action, that's what we do. We get some data and we get it right there. Finally, from our action creator, we can finally dispatch some things, and then we're coming into our reducers. So in this case, once we have the data, we want to dispatch an action with a type of auth. And we want to pass over the data to our reducer. Now we're going to repeat the same process for the sign up. It is identical. So in here, we get the same thing, but we change this from sign in to sign up. And with that, our auth actions are done. Now we have to see if our auth reducers are also done. Inside of here, we're getting the profile and then we're setting it to the local storage. So this part also seems to be done for now. To check if it works, I'm gonna save all the files and go back to the browser. Okay, once we are here, for now we cannot see the posts, but that's okay. Well, let's try to sign up. Inside of here, we have the sign in, but let's first create an account. Let's do something like John Wick, and that is going to be johnwick@gmail.com. The password is going to be 123123. First of all, obviously something is wrong right there because our input is not hidden. It's not a password. And then our repeat password looks okay. So let's go ahead and check what's wrong with that. Why don't we have our password? That is going to be in the auth, more specifically in the password field. So that should be right here. So if the show password is true, then set that to text, otherwise show that to password. Okay, that seems to be great. But maybe our show password is wrong. So let's check the show password. Show password by default should be set to false, and it is. So where does the error seem to be? Let's check that out. Well, one thing that I can notice is that in here, in the switch mode, we're calling handle show password and setting that to false. We simply should have called the set show password and set that to false. So inside of here, I'm gonna change this to set show password. Let's save that and see if it makes a difference. Okay, now it's good, but I still don't see that icon on the right side that lets me toggle this thing. So let's see what is wrong with that. So if I go back right there, and that's going to be inside of our input component. So I'm gonna head there. Let's see. So if name is equal to password, oh, there we go, password. What is a password? JavaScript doesn't know that. So obviously we have to make this password. Now, if we save that, let's see if that is going to make a difference. There we go. Now we have this nice icon. We can again go as John Wick, 123123. Let's see if we made a mistake. We haven't. That's really good. And finally, repeat password 123123. Now I'm gonna collapse this. I'm gonna clear the console and go to the application tab. In here, let's see if our local storage is going to be populated with our newly created profile. I'm gonna click sign up right now, and looks like something did not work. And don't worry, I just wanted to show you that this is the thing that usually happens. Remember, for the past half an hour or so, we worked on the backend solely. We didn't check for mistakes, we didn't see if anything goes wrong, we just went ahead and tested it. Usually when you change something for a bigger amount of time, it's not going to work the first time you test it. That's just what I wanted to show you. So right now we have 404 and looks like it's just sign up. So it's just one more typo. And this is going to be happening on the front-end side, I think. So if I go back to the code, to our API, there we go, sign up. So we're just missing that N right here. With that changed, let's try to make another request. John Wick, again, John Wick, 123, 123, and let's test it out. Again, I'm gonna open the application tab to see if our local storage is going to get populated. Sign up, and again, we have an error. Sign up, not found, localhost 5000/users/sign up. Okay, so now I see that we're making a request to the correct route, localhost 5000/users/sign up. Let's see what seems to be the problem. I think that on the backend in our routes, more specifically in the index.js of the server, we said user, not users. So again, it's just a small typo. You have to be really concise with the routes on the backend and the routes on the frontend. So now that I changed this to user, it should work right now. Again, John Wick, 123, 123, and let's test it out. Okay, there we go. Looks like we are logged in. We have our J right there, John Wick, and let's open the application tab. And would you look at that? We have our email, we have our name, our password, which is now hashed. Take a look at this. This is not 123, 123. This is a complete hash of the password. And finally, we have the backend generated token, which stores all the information about the user. So now if I refresh the page, the user shouldn't be logged out. And there we go. He is not. He is still here. Finally, can we log out? The answer is yes, we can. And to test our sign in, let's go with John Wick one more time, 123, 123, and test it out. Okay, with the sign in, we again got a warning or an error saying user. Okay, it looks like I'm missing the N right there. You guys are sure seeing this and are like, oh, you missed the N there. So, okay, now we have it. Now we should be able to sign in one more time, and let's do it. There we have it. We successfully created the account, stored it in the database, registered, and logged in. And the login is also persistent. You can refresh all the way you want. The user is still going to be signed in for an hour or until he presses log out. Now our next step is to check if the user can do all of the user actions, like creating a post or deleting a post, or maybe liking some posts. So that's going to be our next step. Before we check for all of these actions though, there's one more thing that we have to do, and that is going to be in the API. Remember how I told you that we created this Axios instance so that we can add one more thing to it. And that one thing is going to help our auth middleware. Our middleware cannot work without that one thing. And that thing is adding something specific to each one of our requests. How do we do that? We can say API.interceptors and .request. This is going to be a function that's going to happen on each one of our requests. So in here, we can say .use, and then you provide a callback function. That callback function gets a request as the first parameter. So again, this is going to happen before all of these requests. So why do we need this? Because we have to send our token back to our backend so that the backend middleware can verify that we are actually logged in. For that, we can say if local storage.get item, and we want to get the item of profile, that's where we store the token. So if that exists, then we want to add something to our request. And that something is going to be rec.headers.authorization. Just like this. Remember, if we go to the backend and take a look at our middleware right here, you can see that we're taking something from rec.headers.authorization. And now that I look at it, this must be uppercased. Great, so now let's take a look. Rec.headers.authorization, in here we need to put our token. And the token is going to be a string, and it needs to start with the word bearer. So this is going to be a bearer token. The first thing is the bearer, just a string, and then the second thing divided by a space is the actual token. We can get that by saying json.parse. Inside of there, we get the local storage .get item, we get the profile, and then finally, if I can close this correctly, on that profile, we need to say .token, like this. So we want to get the token from that specific profile. And looks like I'm missing something. No, that seems to be it. So we're adding the bearer, prepending that string to our token, and now we're adding that to each and every request. Finally, with interceptors, we have to return the actual request so that we can make all of these future requests. With that, our backend will be able to get a specific header, and then based on that header, we can do what we've done here, decode the data, and based on that, our backend is going to know that our user is indeed logged in. So for the user creation, now that we have this rec user ID on the backend, we can head to controllers and posts. We've dealt with the like post, but we also have to make a change to our create post right here. So you can find that create post controller in the post.js controllers, and then in here, we can make some changes. Inside of here, we don't have to take all of these values because they are just one thing. They are the entire post. So we want to have the entire post. And then we set the new post message to be equal to new post message. Inside of here, we're going to have the entire post. So what we can do is, first of all, spread the values of a specific post. And then this is the key part. We want to set the creator of the post, so creator, to be equal to rec.userid. So now our backend automatically specifies the creator of a specific post. And then we also want to add a created at property. So created at, and created at, we can set that to be equal to new date, call that as a function, and then put .to ISO string. This is going to make sure that our date definitely shows the value when it was created. So these were some of the changes that we had to make to this create post. But now that we changed this, now our creator is no longer going to be the name that we ourselves specify. It is going to be an ID. That means that we have to go to our post message model right there. And now, along with the creator, we need to add one more thing, and that is going to be a name. So we still want to have the name, but it is going to be the name of the person who is logged in, not something that we can type ourselves. Before, we had to type in our name because we didn't have the login, but now we do, and that is a great thing. I understand that some of these changes are really hard to get a good grasp on if you're first time building this thing. Like, what is even JSON Web Token? How does that relate to middleware? And why are we adding headers and a token each time that we send a request from the front end? These things can definitely be daunting. So if you're having some troubles understanding, definitely make sure to rewind some of the parts of the video and rewatch them. But still, one more time, I'm going to make sure to go through the whole workflow to explain what's happening. This time, I'll show all of that in the browser's console. So one more time, I'll go back right here, and we're going to open our network tab. We're going to be looking at the requests that we've made from our frontend to the backend. Before we do that, I forgot to remove this creator right here. We don't need that anymore. So let's change that in our code. That is going to be in the form right here. So inside of the form, we have to remove that creator variable. We can completely remove it since we don't need that anymore. And are there some other changes? Yeah, we have to remove it from here, set post data. And is there something else that we want to change? Yep, we have the creator right here as well. So we want to delete that. Okay, now we remove that name, but how is our backend going to know what name do we use? Well, what you can do is right in here, when you're sending that specific user, you can add it. So if we dispatch a creation right here, we can specify the post data. So we can create a new object. We can spread the post data. So this is not going to change anything that we had so far, but now we can add a name property. And name is going to be equal to the users that's currently logged in. And that user is going to be stored in the local storage. So how do we get the user? You can say const user is equal to json.parse and then local storage dot get item, and then in there you put a string of profile. This is going to make sure to grab the user for you. Now in here we can say user question mark dot, that's checking if we currently have the user, and then result question mark dot, and finally in here is the name of the user. All of that is going to be equal to a name. If somebody is changing this, we also want to keep his username. So in this case, we're also going to do the same thing, create an object, spread the post data, and finally set the name to be equal to user.result.name. One more thing that we can do in here is check if there is no currently logged in users. In that case, we want to show a card that says, no, you cannot create a post right now. So let's do that. If no user question mark dot result question mark dot name, in that case, we want to return something. And that something is going to be a paper, like we're wrapping something in paper, like our form is wrapped. That paper is going to have a class name of classes.paper. And then inside of here, we're going to simply add one typography. That typography is going to be of a variant h6, and it is going to have a line equal to center. In there, I'm going to type, please sign in to create your own memories and like others' memories. Now we can save that, and I think that's going to be it with our form. Let's go back and test it out. Now we have the title, message, everything else is the same. Okay, you can head to the network tab and you can clear it. Now we're going to be looking at the requests that we are making from the front end to the back end. Again, title is going to be something like New Year, message is going to be Happy New Year. And by the way, guys, I really wish you a happy new year, a wonderful one, a productive one. Have fun, enjoy it, and I wish it's definitely going to be better than the previous one. Okay, now let's add the tags. You know how people do the tags. New year, happy new year, and also let's do 2021. Finally, I'm going to select an image. Let's do fireworks, and let's submit it. There we go. You can see that we have 204 requests right here. 204 is not good. You can see that our post wasn't created. But let's open it and see what's in there. So 204 means that it didn't went right, but let's see what happened. In here, we can see that we don't have headers. At least I don't see them. Request headers. We don't have the headers for the specific token. Yep, they're definitely missing. So let me open the application tab. And let's see here in the result, do we have our token? We do, it is right in here. But for some reason, this token wasn't added to our request. Okay, so in this first one, we do have all the information from the request payload. We have the tags, title, selected file, and the message. But in the second request, we don't have anything. We have to figure out why the post wasn't made on the backend. And if we open our code, more specifically our terminal, we should get some kind of an error from the backend. And we do, it is right in here. Cannot read property split of undefined add auth. That is happening on the backend, more specifically in the middleware right here. It's saying that it cannot read property split of undefined. That means that the rec.headers wasn't sent. So one more time, in here, I'm going to console log, this time just the rec.headers to see if you're getting absolutely any headers from the front end. I'm going to go back and just type some gibberish right here, test, 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 and click submit. Let's see if this time the headers are being sent. Looks like they're not. If I go back, we get the same error again, but we do see some headers right there. The question is do we have the authorization? And looks like there it is. Authorization bearer token is right in here. So that is good. We have them. Oh, but here's the thing. first time that I wrote authorization, it was correct with lowercase letter. No matter how you write it at the front end, at the back end, it is always going to receive as the lowercase key letter. Okay, so now that this is done, there is one more thing that we have to do, and that is exchange the creator for name in our post. That is going to be right here inside of posts and then post. Before, creator was the name of our person, but now it's not going to be the creator, it is going to be simply name. We changed that. The creator is now the ID of the person who is creating it. With that said, we can collapse our terminal and potentially go back and try one more time. Let's go with New Year one more time. Happy New Year. And in here, I'm just gonna do holidays now. We're gonna add the fireworks image and let's see our request. There we go. John Wick's name was immediately populated. The timestamp is correct a few seconds ago. Hashtags are here, title is here, and everything is here. If we take a look in here, we get 201 created, and we get all of the information for our specific post. This is great. That means that the user can successfully create posts right now. You can see that our user also has the edit button and the delete button. We still haven't changed those for non-logged in user. That's going to be the next step. And we also have the like button. And now if we log out, take a look. Please sign in to create your own memories and like other people's memories. So right now we cannot create new ones if we're not signed in. Of course, the edit, delete, and like shouldn't be here as well, because if you're not logged in, you shouldn't be able to do those actions. Okay, so now let's log back in as John Wick and let's see if we can like, delete, and edit these posts. We can start with like. And looks like our like action is dispatched. As you can see that right here on the network tab, we have 200 and the like was indeed added under likes. And if we remove it, let's take a look. Yeah, it was removed. That means that the backend for likes works completely, but on the front end, we're not seeing the change. As you can see, we only have the like. We don't see the number of likes that we have. So that is going to be our next step. Of course, we're seeing likes under the post, and post is this component, post.js. Inside of here, somewhere, we need to have the button to like something. And it is indeed here, just like, and then we have the like count. But considering the like count doesn't exist anymore, it's not showing it. So how do we fix that? Well, this is going to be a bit tougher because you know how it goes with likes. Like if you have one like, and how it goes with grammar at all. You have one like, but then there are 2 likes and then 3 likes. And then if you like something but other people don't like something, you have to have a different message. So to show all of these likes and like and different buttons, depending on if you liked something or didn't like something, I'm going to create a new, let's call it a subcomponent of the post component. It is going to be called likes. The logic for creating the likes subcomponent is going to be incredibly simple, but you have to write a lot of code to get it right because you have to check for a lot of things. So what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to give you the logic for that right here. I'm going to paste it because it would take us quite some time to actually go through everything and see what we have. So just to go over it, we are first checking if a current person likes something or if it didn't like something. We can check that in 2 ways. We're checking if the likes array contains the ID of the current person, and that can be either the Google ID if the person did the OAuth, or it can be a custom ID from the database. If that is the case, we want to say you and a certain number of people liked something, or the post has 1 like or multiple likes, you can see the S there. And then if the person didn't like it, we can just say the number of like or likes and so on. And then if nothing happened, if you're the first to like it, it's just like. So a lot of things happening here, but again, just wanted to give you a bit of code so you don't have to write this by hand, because really it's not complicated logic. It is really simple, but it takes some time to write correctly. Okay, with that said, you can see that we're missing the user right there, and the user is just coming from the local storage. For example, we're getting the user from the form, so you can copy that line. It is just going to be const user is equal to json.parse, local storage, get item, and then profile. Finally, now that we have that, we can put those likes right inside of our like button. I'll try to expand it into multiple lines like this. We currently had this, but now we have the button. I'm also going to add a disabled property. So if we don't have the currently logged in user, I'm going to say disabled, and it's going to be disabled if there is no user dot result. So if there is no user, we cannot press the button. Okay, and now inside of that button, we're simply going to have our new component, which is called likes. This should solve all of our troubles with viewing the likes. Great, let's check it out. If I go back, you can see we have one like and it seems liked. If I click it again, it says nothing. It just says like. It doesn't say 0 likes. It's not blue. You can see it's just outlined and it just says like. If I like it, and if I log out now and try to sign in as a different person, for example, I'm going to go here and go with JavaScript Mastery this time. You can see it's one like. It's only outlined. If I click it, it's now 2 likes. So that looks really good. It is like Facebook has it. If more than 2 people like this, I think it's going to say you and 3 others or 5 others or 100 others. So this is really good. With that said, we can move on to the next thing, and that is happening right now as we're logged in with JavaScript Mastery. As you can see, we didn't create this post. Of course, we can like it, sure, but we shouldn't be able to delete it or edit it. And now the delete and edit buttons are right here. So we have to disable that from happening. Let's go back to our post and move those buttons away. Inside of here, what we have to do is we have to check if the current post was created from the current user. Only in that case do we want to show the current delete button. So to do that, I'm going to open the logic block, and then inside of there, I'm going to write some parentheses. I'm going to check if user dot result dot Google ID. We already had that, so we're checking if the ID is equal to post dot creator. So we're checking if the currently logged in user via Google has the same ID as the creator of the post. Or there's a second possibility, if the user dot result dot underscore ID, if that is equal to post dot creator. So now we're checking if the Google logged in user or if our manually logged in user is the creator of this post. Only if that is the case, then we want to show the delete button. So to do that, we can do what we learned, and then in here, we put the button. This is going to now appear only if the logged in person is the post creator. If we go back, let's see if that works. And there we go. The delete button is now, well, deleted. Let's try to do the same thing for the edit. Remember, the edit is hidden right here on the top right. If we go back, you can essentially just copy this line, the line 52 for me now, and we're going to put it above our overlay. So right here, what you have to do is simply close it down here. This is also going to make the button for the edit show up only if the creator is the currently logged in user. Go back and edit button is gone. Now I'll log out, go back in, sign in as John Wick, and let's test it out. There we go. Our delete button is here and our edit button is here. That works perfectly. If I'm not mistaken, to make this app complete, there's only one more step that we have to do, and that is check if the token has expired. Right now, we are never checking if the token has expired, and remember, it only lasts for an hour. That means that if the user is logged in for more than an hour and he tries to make a certain change like create a post or delete a post or edit it, he won't be able to do so. In that case, we have to check it and we have to log him out. So right now, I'm going to open the console and the application tab. We can clearly see that our user is logged in right now, and if we refresh, he's still going to be logged in. I'm not sure if an hour had passed, but let me try to delete this. As you saw, I just tried to delete a post, but nothing happened. And if we go to the console, well, we don't get a lot of information, but if we go to our network tab and take a look at a request, you can see it is still pending. And we don't really have a lot of information on what's going on. But if we go to the backend, that could give us more info. So right now, I'm going to open the server and take a look. JWT expired. That means that we are not allowed to like or delete a post. There is going to be a simple way to solve this, and that is if the token is expired, we simply need to log the user out. For that, we're going to head to our navbar. What we have to do is we have to check if the token is expired. How can we do that? Well, we first have to check even if the token exists, and then if that's the case, we want to decode it. We can decode a token like this. Const decoded token is equal to decode, and then we pass in the token. That decode is the function that we need to import. We need to import it from JWT decode. So import decode from JWT decode. That way, it's going to give us information on when this token is expiring. Finally, we need a simple if check. That is going to be if decoded token .exp, that's the expiry, multiplied by 1000 is lower than new date, and then finally .get time. So we want to get the current time. If that is the case, we want to log out. So if the decoded token .expiry multiplied by 1000, this is going to be a certain value in milliseconds. If that is lower than new date.get time, so this is the current time in milliseconds, in that case, we simply want to call the logout action. And that is in this case, this function here, which is going to dispatch the logout and then push us back. If we save that, that should be it. Now, considering our John Wick was expired, or his token was, as soon as we came back to the page, we were signed out. On the signed out users, as you can see, we have nothing, we cannot even like them, and we also don't have a delete or edit button. Now, if we go ahead and try to sign in as a different user, for example, JavaScript Mastery, there we go. We can like it, but we cannot delete or edit. And let me try to create one new post. Let's do something like MERN3 is now out. You guys have been requesting this video for so long, and now it's out. I'm gonna say awesome tutorial, and tags is gonna be auth and all auth, something like that. There we go. So let's choose an image. We can also choose fireworks and submit it. There we go. As you can see, we can edit it, we can delete it, we can like it. Yeah, you can like your own post. Nobody's saying you should do that, but you can. And finally, if we log out now and sign in with a different person like John Wick, there we go. We have this different post that can be only liked but cannot be deleted or edited. And that is it. With that step, we brought our MERN application to the end. Of course, this is a complete social media project, and we can keep building it as long as you guys want. Make sure to like and comment all 3 parts of the current series, and I'll definitely do more. Now, let's go on to the last part of this video, and that is going to be deployment. How are we going to deploy this project? In this video, we're going to do a really robust and a great production level deployment. For that, we'll be using Zeet. The link for Zeet is going to be down in the description, so make sure to click it and then come to here. The first thing that you can do is you can log in via GitHub. And now in here, you'll be able to add one free trial project. In our case, we have a MERN application, and MERN application is going to be divided into 3 different things: the front end, the back end, and the database. So let's start with deploying the front end part. You can choose a new project from GitHub, you'll have to authorize it, and you can search for MERN memories. Of course, don't forget to push all of the changes that you've made in your application. I'm going to click continue, and in here, I'm going to say something like memories, front end. There we go, deploy it. In here, it's going to ask you what kind of project do you have. This is going to be a Node static site with React. And then finally, in this case, it's not going to be simply npm install. It is going to be cd./client, because we first have to move to the client, then end npm install, and finally end npm run build. We are working with a full stack project, so make sure to first navigate to client and then installed and build. Finally, in here, static output path is going to be ./client/build. Once you save this, that is going to be it. It's going to take a minute or 2 to build the whole project for production, but after that, you should get a link that's going to be deployed online for everybody to see. And there we go. Our project is deployed. Now we can go to the dashboard and take a look. We have a deployed project, and here's the link to visit it. Memories frontend.zeet app. I deployed the version 1, so in here we don't have the sign up, But if you pushed everything correctly to the GitHub, you should have access to the latest code. Of course, with Zeed, it's really easy to change the branch. The only thing you have to do is in here, deploy the branch part 3 in my case. Right now, we have only branch 1 and 2. Okay, so we have our frontend deployed, but now we have to deploy our database and our backend. The process is going to be the same, but the thing is, with Zeed, you have one project completely free, and we use that one for the frontend. So if you want to use it, you'll have to upgrade your account to the professional one, and that one is $5 per project. So definitely, if you want to deploy more projects or if this is for a professional environment, it's better to go with Zeed. They have a really robust architecture and you can deploy absolutely everything on one side with a few clicks, rather than going to a few places to deploy the backend and frontend separately. I completely understand that it's not going to be possible for everybody to have multiple projects with Zeed. If that's the case, feel free to watch the end of the part 2. There I show you how to do really a minimal deployment using Netlify and Heroku. It's not as good as this one, but I hope it helps. Now for everybody who does decide to go with Zeed, I'm gonna show you how to finish it up. You can click new project right here and let's select one new one. This one is going to be a Docker image. We can do something like Mongo right here, and this is going to be memories Mongo. In here, you can choose your database username, like JavaScript Mastery, for example, and we can choose a password. I'm going to go with 123, 123, 123. Not as secure, but this is just a demo project. Finally, we can deploy it. Okay, our database is already deployed. That is great. Now let's deploy our backend. For that, we can go to a new project and to GitHub. In here, you can again choose the project memories. And in here, I'm going to say memories backend. Okay, this is going to be a unique name, so you're going to have to go with something different. I'm going to deploy it, and then in here, we'll have to choose our configuration for the backend. For the backend, in here, I'm going to choose the Node 14 version. The build command is going to be cd server and then npm install. And finally, the run command is going to be cd server and node index.js. With that, we can save it. Okay, while our backend is building, you can click the backend, go to the settings, and then you can copy this endpoint right here. For me, it is the memories backend Zeed app. With that, you can go back to your application and navigate to the index.js of the API on the client side. In here, you'll simply have to paste this URL right here. Of course, you need to add the HTTPS and then / right here. This is the change that we need to make on the front end, and then going to the backend, we'll have to change our index.js of the backend. Inside of here, we need to change this connection URL because it is going to be just a bit different. What you can do is first of all remove this +srv. In here, you have to put the username of your database. If I go check it out with the memories Mongo and to settings, I went with JavaScript Mastery. And the password is 123, 123. So if we go back in here, this is going to be JavaScript Mastery, and the password is going to be 123, 123, 123. Finally, we have to change this URL, and that is going to be changed to your database's URL. Again, if you go back, you can find it right here on the Memories Mongo project, and then overview. You can see private endpoint is Memories Mongo production. For you, it might be a bit different. Finally, you can paste that in here. And the last name is the name of the database. You can call it something like memories. And this is going to be it. We changed the backend and we changed the frontend to match the name of our backend. As you can see, memories backend Zeed. And the last thing in here, memories backend Zeed. One final thing that you have to do is finally do git add, git commit, git push. In this case, I'm going to guide you to the process of deploying it just to be 100% sure it works. I am on branch part 1 and part 2, and I'm simply going to do git add. I'm on branch part 1 and 2 on the root of the folder, so project memories. I have the client and the server both in here, and I'm going to do git add. Don't worry about this. We can do git commit, and then in here, I'm going to leave a message for myself, delete this commit. because I don't want to leave this for you guys in part 1 and 2. In here, we should see no different code. It should be as it were before you started the video. All the changes for the third part are in the branch part 3. Okay, and finally, we need to do git push. That's going to push all the changes. Great, so now that is pushed, and let's see in our browser if the changes will apply. And there we go. As you can see, Zeed automatically started building those projects. For React apps, it takes a bit longer because it has to actually build it out for production and then deploy it. But in a minute or two, hopefully we'll see our changes. And there we go. Everything is deployed. Just to make sure that it works for all of you, I'm going to go through some of the most common issues that people have. First of all, go to the backend part, settings, and then in here, change the port to 5000. One other thing that can be the issue, in the code, more specifically in the connection URL, you can change this last part. / something, you can change it to / admin. Admin is the default database created for you by Mongo, so this is going to work in most cases. One other thing, if a simple password like 123 doesn't work, you can switch it to something more complex and make sure to change it in Zeed as well. So you can do that if you head to MongoDB and then in here, settings, you can change the password. With all of that said, our project is now deployed. Let's take a look at it. Of course, to take a look at the finished product, you can head to the front-end part of this project. There we go. We are in here. I just created this test post, but everything seems to be working fine. Let's try creating a few other posts. I'm gonna do test 1, test 1, test 1, and again, an image right here. There we go. This works. You can add, you can delete the posts. Everything works perfectly. Besides one thing, and that is the login and authentication using Google. If you try clicking that, you'll be able to see that it says redirect URI mismatch. This is not a problem that we've made. We just have to make sure to add this new URL to the Google credentials. To do that, you can again head to console.developers.google.com and then to credentials. The link is going to be in the description. Inside of here, you can click the Memories app, and now we have to add that new endpoint of our application. No longer is this going to be localhost 3000. Now we have the Memories frontend Zeed app. So right now I'm going to add the URI, and it's going to be just this. And for the redirect URIs, I'm going to add the same one, and I'm going to also add the same one with the / auth. Now, if we save that, our app should be working fine. Google sign in, and right here, there we go. We are logged in. If it didn't work right away for you, make sure to do that trick where you delete the cache and delete all the memory from the browser. There's going to be a link to the description of the Stack Overflow solution down below, so you can also check that out. But with that said, this works completely. Our application is now deployed using Zeed. We have this URL that you can send to absolutely anyone, and all of our projects are deployed on the same site, the front end, the back end, and MongoDB. That is truly revolutionary. And the thing is, you really cannot notice how robust Zeed is because of their simplicity. The UI itself is extremely simple and user-friendly, but their systems are really robust. With that said, if you had any issues with the deployment, make sure to contact Chad. Right here, you can click this bubble icon in the bottom right. The team will quickly get back to you. With that said, we are at the end of the third part of the Memories project. It was definitely a long ride, but it doesn't have to end yet. If you'd like to see a part 4 where we make this better even further, feel free to let me know what features would you like me to add. That's going to be it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next one.